All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday and welcome to the next edition of the Confido Legal Case Management Jam Session. My name is Emery Wager. I'm one of the co-founders of Confido Legal. We're an embedded payments platform specifically designed to help legal technology companies embed payments and financial services into their applications in a way that complies with the rules of professional conduct. And today, we're going to talk legal case management, specifically SOPs, and how to set those up at your firm and implement those either inside or outside software. And I'm very excited to be back here to jam on this topic with Casita Simpson. She's the founder and CEO of Simpson Associates, and her business helps law firms select and implement the right technology. She also helps firms with outsourced paralegal and administrative support. So she's been in the trenches and she's also helped firms set up that technology. So she has a great perspective on firm administration and helping a firm run a better business using software and setting up these standard operating procedures. So very excited to chat with her. We touched on this topic a little bit a few weeks ago, and this is really kind of part two of that conversation where we're going to dive a little bit deeper. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the comment section on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and we'll try to pick those up and get those into the conversation. So with that, Casita, welcome.
Hi, thank you again for having me. These are always great. They're the highlight of my Friday, to be honest.
Awesome. Me too. I enjoy chatting with you and hearing your experience. I mean, you've really seen it all from that kind of firm administration side. So it's great to connect and figure out what is at stake, really. If you don't focus on this area, you don't set up good SOPs. I know you've seen both sides of it. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that. What's your opinion on kind of why does this matter? Why not just wing it if you're a firm? Like you feel like your processes pretty well, and why go to the trouble of setting it all up?
Yeah, so you know your processes very well, but no one else does. So therein lies the biggest problem, right? Because by you knowing what's to be done, why not make a process out of it? Why not set up procedures so that whoever's coming on board, they also know your process. They're not coming to you. And really, when you think about anything involving a law firm, everything involves time, right? Everything takes some kind of time, and the billable hour is always something. But there are things that are done that are not helpful with billing hours. And employee coming to you and saying, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? Why did you do this? Why do you do that? Those are questions that you can't necessarily bill for. You just have to eat the cost and just assist with that. So if you're trying to save time, it's in your best interest, is what I'm trying to say, to have the SOP, because it's a time saver. Instead of spending that time repeatedly going over the same types of functions, you set up a procedure, give that to the person who's coming to work for you, especially during onboarding, and they'll be able to come in and do whatever needs to be done. Now, as a paralegal, our job is to always make sure that we're able to help the attorney and not cause there to be more bottlenecks or issues and things like that. Even the best paralegal who could come in and support a firm is going to need to understand your processes and procedures to be able to help you. That's something that changes based on the firm. You could work for 100 firms and they could all be the same practice area, but every firm runs a little bit differently. And they have that secret sauce that makes them unique. And so if you don't have that in a process, then you're explaining these things to people, and that therein lies time that could be spent working on a client file or doing something else. So in hindsight or on surface level, it may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but when you're spending so much time doing it, and if you're a firm that's constantly growing, you're going to be doing that a lot. And having this time set aside, just working on the SOP one time right out the gate, you then put yourself in a position to not have to keep reinventing the wheel or repeating yourself incessantly.
Mm-hmm. I'm always interested in the impact on the client. That's sort of my perspective, how I came, into this industry from the client perspective, and a desire to improve that. What do you see as kind of the differences from the client's perspective on a firm that really has tight SOPs versus one that's maybe more winging it?
I think that there's this surprise and delight component that comes into it, because you're able to, a lot of people are jaded. They have a certain kind of mindset when it comes to attorneys and working with law firms. And by having an SOP in place, you're now identifying all the areas where a client could expect to communicate with you or have a proper expectation of what that relationship will be like with you. And that does surprise and delight. When you take the time to build out an SOP and you're saying, okay, we're going to say as a standard, it's going to take 3 weeks to do this and 5 weeks to do this, or maybe 1 week to do this. And the average response time is going to be 48 hours or 72 hours or maybe 24 hours, whatever the case is. By putting those things in place, the employee obviously will now need to make sure that they're doing these things, but also on the client side, right from consultation, you're able to say, okay, working with me, it's going to be this and this. You're setting the expectation right from the beginning so that everyone's on the same page. And that's how you surprise and delight, by being very transparent and saying, you know, this type of case has these types of issues. And so there may be delays in communication, but just know that we're working on your behalf. One of the things that my client does in every meeting, it says that when you hear from my staff, you're hearing from me. So when you hear from them, respond, because you're hearing from me. That's like communicating with me. So make sure that you respond to that communication and not look for me to communicate with you. That's setting the right expectation. And that was established by creating a process and a procedure to know that this is what needs to happen. When I'm assisting attorneys and law firms as a paralegal in that realm, those are some of the things that I'm asking from the beginning. What is your client journey like? What is it like to work with your firm? Do you have any particular things already in place that I can review so that I know what the expectations are, so that I'm able to handle things the way that you want them? And it's important to know those things, because it just makes it for, if I need to take a call and explain to someone what something is like or what the average turnaround time is, I can now do that. And again, it goes back to that beautiful client experience, because you're explaining it. Now, it may be hard if you can't follow up with it, but that's a different conversation. But at least having something in place and being able to communicate these things to the client gives them that ease. And it also makes them feel like, okay, well, I know that this firm actually cares. They're not just going to take my money and then disappear on me.
Oh, I love that. I mean, the idea of, I think a lot of people, I certainly feel this in our business, but sometimes you're afraid to let go. You're afraid to have another person step into what you are doing, and using the power of setting those clear expectations, it just goes so far and allows so much to get taken off your plate. I loved your example of saying, like, if my staff is communicating with you, you're communicating, you know, think of it as like you're communicating with me. We have these tight processes. I communicate with them when I need to, but they're speaking for me. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of work, I could see, to get to that place at a firm. So a lot has to be in place in order for an attorney, say, to make that statement. So I think that's a great segue into the how. So we talk about why do this, why does it matter? But I know you've been building a lot of kind of content and SOPs around creating SOPs, kind of like meta there. But tell us a little bit about how to get that set up.
I'll be honest with you. And after our first conversation talking about these SOPs, I actually created a couple of YouTube videos around it. And I just wanted to demystify some of those concepts. And taking it a step further, I actually worked on an SOP for a specific situation, and that's going to be a video on the YouTube channel. It's going to be out by next week, so you can check that out. But it's literally first figuring out what exactly we're going to build an SOP on. Like, what is it, right? Are we talking about the client intake piece of it? Are we talking about client onboarding? Are we talking about delivery of service? Are we talking about effective communication? So speaking on just effective communication, okay, what does that look like? How do we effectively communicate with these clients? What is it that the client would need to be made to feel like we're effectively speaking with them and making sure that they're in the position to be really informed about either an update or about whatever's going on in their case. So the SOP that I created was focused on effective communication and how to communicate proactively. And I took a very simple case and I chose trademark because that was something that was universal. And I said, okay, well, how do we communicate proactively? What does that look like? That's our objective. How do we make that happen? and focusing on different touch points that would require someone to need to be communicated with. Let's say, for example, you're working on the comprehensive search and you're running a comprehensive report, or you're doing a knockout search. Once you're done with that, you have recommendations as the attorney to the client. That's a good time to be able to give them an update. But not only that, they may have questions. So in the email where you're saying, hey, review this, here's a link. Go ahead and make sure that you use the link to book time with me. That could then, those two things that I talked about could be implemented in your CRM, where your CRM actually sends the email to them with that link. And if they book time, then it triggers something else happening. And so it's finding those areas where and you have experience of the client wanting more, or wanting to have a conversation with you, or wanting to know an update from you. And those are the areas that you're focused on. If it's not the comprehensive report, maybe it's time you prepare the filing for the application and you're sending it to review. Maybe they have questions at that stage in the game. There's areas where the client is going to be expecting some kind of touch point if we're focusing on effective communication. So you can figure out what that looks like. And it all starts with figuring out what the objectives are, who the stakeholders are. There's a couple of different things that you can really just start listing things. From listing, you then make an outline and say, okay, this is the outline of what we're doing. These are the stakeholders. This is who's going to be involved. If there's any communication templates, what that looks like. What are also the methods of communication? How do you want to communicate with them? What documents are involved? Where do they live? These are all standard things that you can just have them listed. Once you list them, then you can build the SOP, because it's so much easier from there. I actually took these very same steps that we're talking about right now when I built it, and it became easier by the end to implement something into the CRM, because you first had like a brain dump where you dumped everything under the sun that surrounds all these different points that I just mentioned. And then you're like, okay, let's outline it. And let's make sure that we're keeping on mind timeframes, response times, communication channels, internal documenting, like who's going to take notes on what stakeholders are involved to make sure they take notes, and really having a very perfect objective. All right, we've done that. Now we're building this thing out, and all those timeframes are already in there. So now with those timeframes, we can then take it into a system and say, okay, based on this, we're going to trigger this. We're going to send this email. We're going to have this tag. And these people are going to be tasked to do X, Y, and Z. And from there, we'll make sure that we communicate with the client, maybe give them access to the client portal, and keep things going in that way. So the how is just really starting. I know I said this before, but just starting. And when you're starting, just think about the various concepts that come into play, and they're going to come into play regardless of what kind of SOP you're establishing. You're going to want to define the objective. You're going to want to find out who the stakeholders are. You're going to want to know what the communication channels are. How do you want to document the updates internally? How do you want to make sure your team is following along with everything that's going on? What exactly do you want to do in terms of response time? How do you want to make sure that you're getting feedback to make sure things are going the way that they need to go? These are all different things that can be applied to any practice area and any standard operating procedure. And there's so much more, but at least that gets the conversation started and giving you a chance to not feel overwhelmed in the how.
Yeah, no, that's great. I remember last time you were talking about starting at the intersection between client communication, the consequences of client communication, where those are the highest, and your headaches. So yes. finding that intersection and just picking off one thing right at that intersection. So yeah, it makes total sense. Maybe we can get super tactical for a second, because you mentioned the word, we can trigger in our system this. Speak more to the kind of the software component of setting up an SOP. Like, how is that done? Where is that typically done? What are the options there? And maybe even you could talk about specific systems that you like to work in that are really good for kind of that sort of workflow or SOP automation. Yeah,
I would say that to talk about the system specifically, right? I would say that one of the systems that I like using is Locus is a system that I really love using when it comes to building out standard operating procedures. And actually the video that I did was focused on Locus, but that's not the only system. I also really like Lawmatics because it's very robust. And if you're a firm that is heavy in litigation and conflict checks are something that needs to be done intuitively, Lawmatics is amazing at that. And if you're creating a standard operating procedure around conflict checks in and making sure that's a part of the process, that system is going to work very well for you. And I actually have a video already on the channel about that. So you can definitely check that out. But to take it a step further, it's really just, what are the areas that really you want to highlight as an SOP, right? And making sure that the features within your system can support that. So when I was working on the effective communication for trademark services, for example, I really sat there when I was building out the outline and I said, okay, can I do all of this in Locus? Can Locus cover all of these components without there being an issue? And what about the triggers? Like, what are we triggering? Okay, so when the client completes the intake form to be able to begin running that comprehensive search, that should be a trigger. Okay, once they are finished doing that and once it's completed and we've done our part, what should the trigger be then? Maybe we should add a tag. Maybe we should update the system and add a tag. And so the system, Locus, is capable of updating the matter, updating the lead, making sure that you're adding in those tags. And you can have entry rules and exit rules. And not saying that this is the only system that does it, but from a budgetary standpoint, as well as a really robust system, Locus covers both. And so by having entry and exit conditions, you can really dictate where things are coming in and how things are moving out. And it's really intuitive. And tags they're one of the easiest ways to get things in and out. So you can have a matter tag and have it be, okay, the client has approved the trademark application, for example. By putting that tag, that then triggers something else to begin starting inside of the system. And it's just really figuring out the key areas that are going to work the best. And I found that once you really have an outline of what you're trying to do, you can then see if your system marries up to that really quickly. Because if you're having a really hard time trying to get your system to send an email, it's like, okay, yeah, we're having some real issues here. This system is not the one for me, which I haven't really found one that's like that. If you're big on appointment scheduling and you give out appointment links, how do you want to go about doing that? Lawmatics is really good about having the appointment-based triggers already embedded inside their custom forms and their custom workflows that they're building out. It's already an automation there. So it's really cool depending on the system that you want to go with. And if you're using a system that I haven't mentioned, then it's really figuring out. I don't really like to talk down on any system, but I know that there's some limitations with some. And you really have to figure out what's going to make the best sense for you. And if you're relying on a third-party integration like Zapier, for example, to be able to make things work the way that you want them to, I love Zapier, and Zapier does serve a purpose. But if that's the only way that you're able to make workflows and automations work, then you're kind of in a little bit of trouble, because there are systems out there that are like that, where unfortunately they give you their workflows to work with, but there's no customizing. And a part of this SOP is having the flexibility to customize, because not every firm is cookie cutter, and certain systems don't allow you to customize. And the reason why I keep harping on Locus and Lawmatics, and honestly Cosmolex too, and honestly, though you're able to do a little bit more customizing in a way that you can't do in another system. It's really, by having that SOP, you can really, I keep making it seem like the SOP is the holy grail, but really it just helps you find the areas that are at issue. It really does, because if you're building a procedure for something very specific and your system can't hack it, then you know now that it's time to find a different system. And although it may be a headache, it's better to do it now versus trying to implement all these things, fighting with the system to get things to work that's not working. And I understand Lawmatics is more of a premium service, but they have certain things that they do very well. But they're not the only one. Cosmolex is amazing at customizing and integrating things, and their system works very well. I'm actually going to be working on probably next month some videos surrounding Cosmolex specifically, but Locus has been my love for the longest time, and for many, many reasons. And I think the team does very well at making sure that they keep the attorney at top of mind and implementing things and showcasing and releasing features that really work to the firm's benefit.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Zapier and similar tools. So that's a great perspective. Like, having it in your back pocket but not having it be necessarily the only thing that you have to automate and implement those SOPs. So.
Yeah, I've seen it, and it's a little scary, There's some systems out there that are so great at integrating. I've worked on a project for a law firm that does all of their beginning stuff, everything from the lead coming in to the payment method and all of that. All of those steps are done inside of HubSpot. And prior to working with this particular firm, I would not have recommended HubSpot as a solution for a law firm. After working with this firm, oh my God, mind blown, like mind blown. The system was so great at taking the engagement letter and making sure that the person is not able to sign the engagement letter without paying. Now, to me, that wowed me because I know that there are systems like Dubsado that gives you that ability to have that sequence of, the proposal, the contract, and the invoice, and you can't actually leave that whole thing unless you pay the invoice. HubSpot does that. And now it's just like, ooh, it's so nice. It was so nice. And, it does these analytics as well, where like someone fills out a contact form and you can see how long they were on the page from them filling out the contact form. It goes into your system right away and you're able to then do whatever you need to do with them, send them emails, send them whatever custom templates you have, and nurture that lead and also keep in touch with them, and all the summary and everything is in there. It runs like a practice management system. It does. And it's so robust. There's so many things to custom. That is customization on steroids. That is really customization on steroids. And you're paying a pretty penny for it, but I guess why. And Lawmatics is not far behind with that either. They also have that embedded website form where you build out that contact form and it gives you that embedded code where you can just dump it on your website. Like I'm not saying you can nicely put it on your website.
Don't dump it.
You can nicely put it on your website and know that it's going to feed back into your CRM. So some of these programs are pricey, but I think they're pricey for a reason. I think that they have certain things that set them apart from some of the other entry-level practice management systems.
Yeah. And what's the cost of not implementing it? Extremely high if it's your time and you're the bottleneck for the firm. So yes. Awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end here. Maybe, Casita, what is it like if a firm comes to you and basically just says, I need to set up these SOPs. I want my team to follow it. And as much as possible, I want to automate them, depending on how much of that can be automated in a reasonable way. Like, what does your process look like?
Yeah, I usually start out with an audit. And it's usually like a systems audit or a process and procedures audit so that I can get a better understanding of all the things. And from there, once I have a really good idea of what are all the areas of opportunity that really needs to be flushed out, I'll then create standard operating procedures surrounding each one of those things, depending on how deep they want it to be. So if we're focusing on client intake, we're going to do that's going to be really long and it's going to be detailed so that we can outline all of the nuances. And that will then be something that you can make very short to then communicate with your client about. So I'm giving you the short version so that you can say, okay, in the consult, you're able to say that you can deliver this and this, and you can also give them what to expect with engaging with that particular firm. So that's one side of it. And then if they require implementation from there, they can then purchase that service separately and we can implement the SOPs into the CRM and have those two things work together. In terms of, after we're done with the audit, I'm obviously building out those SOPs and they're with the firm forever. They can do whatever they want with them. And my experience and my recommendation is to have some kind of manual, some kind of internal handbook that you can now give to different employees and different members that are coming to work with you. And I usually recommend that right after they're onboarded by HR or whoever is responsible for getting them set up as a person in your firm, you'll then give them these SOPs to now say, okay, review them. To take it a step further, I've even either before we implement or after we implement, I create videos if they request it, to then explain what the process is like doing certain things inside of the system. And so that way, at any stage in the game, whoever is coming to work for that firm, they not only have handwritten text that they can use as a resource, but they also have videos that you could use as a resource as well, which I found to be really helpful because, as you know, everyone thinks differently and everyone processes the information differently. And so some people learn by doing, some people learn by reading, some people learn by showing. So it's different based on the person, and you're able to meet them where they are by having these different options available. But that's usually what it is. We start with an audit. We then discuss what needs to be put together in terms of the SOPs. I give them those deliverables. And then if they want me to implement them into their CRM, we then talk about what the pricing would be for that separately.
Awesome. And it sounds like for those that are just curious and maybe just want a little bit of help and to do it themselves, sounds like you have some videos coming out shortly with outlining this process. Specifically, I think you said it was Locus, that
yes,
the case study.
Yes. So. Yes, I had a lot of fun working on this actually, and I geek out on these kind of things. So it was a lot of fun to just, really think about not only from the attorney perspective, but also from the client perspective. Because when we talk about effective communication, it's not for the attorney, it's for the client. And I don't know why I always start with, I do know why. They're the heart of the company. You don't have anything without your clients. So keeping them happy and keeping them engaged and in the loop really just helps. I've received so much feedback. I've received so many reviews from clients of law firms when I've supported them with paralegal support because I've assisted them with implementing these things. And it's really important. I'm keeping it really short. I remember working for a firm that hired me on, and when they hired me, they didn't have any processes in place, like at all. And so I would ask them for certain things and they just was like, okay, do what you wish. So I did. I created email templates. I created appointment scheduling links. I created intake forms. I created the whole life cycle I created the handbook, for crying out loud, that the attorney and the other staff members were responsible for using. And it wasn't because I wanted to, it was necessary. It was necessary because I was then hiring employees that I was training to do the work, and I was able to train them based on having these things in place. And I know it works well. And so the video itself is on Locus specifically. I worked through the outline of it, show them the outline. I worked through the SOP and explain the SOP. And I also show them what it's like to implement it into the CRM. So it's a 3-part series, and the series will actually be released next week, Thursday. So They'll have it to see next week, Thursday. But in terms of some of the demystifying these SOPs, there's 2 videos already on the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Cass Loves Tech, and they can actually watch those videos to be able to kind of get an idea of what that's like. One of the videos focuses on conflict checks, and I use the Lawmatic system to go over that, and the other video focuses on Locus. So those are out there already. And then the full length that covers from beginning to end and the process that I go through is also there, and that will be released next Thursday.
Awesome. And we'll get the link to your YouTube channel in the comments on LinkedIn to make sure people can find it easily and check it out next week when those videos go live. So with that, thank you all for joining. If you are curious about doing a little bit of kind of high-level research about new case management systems, you can check out our Legal Case Management Hub, where there's a database and some FAQs, along with a survey that you can fill out, and we'll send you a recommendation for a system. That's confidolegal.com/LCM for legal case management. I dropped the link in the chat there. If you want to take it to the next level and get some real help with selecting software, implementing software, and setting it up, definitely talk to Casita.
Yeah, and you could actually check out my website. It's simpson-assoc.com. And the website actually has a pop-up message that gives you access to a CRM guide. So if you're ready to start implementing in your CRM, there is a free guide that you can just populate your information, and we'll send you an email with that information.
Oh, awesome.
Yep.
Definitely check that out. So with that, we'll sign off for the day. Hopefully some people are starting their weekends at this point. It's still the morning on the West Coast, so we've got a few more hours. But it's great to see everyone. Casita, it's always a pleasure to chat. And I'm sure we'll be back doing this again soon.
We will.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.